Hi, I'm Kelly Harris, and I'm going to present my case study today for EDL 850, copyright and the computer. So, to establish the facts, St. Regis School is in a rural community. It's the only school in town and has students kindergarten to 8th grade, and there are 420 students. Their financial situation relies heavily on fundraising from their PTA. The annual budget provides just the basics and a small amount left over for either computers or software. Mr. Sample is a somewhat new principal in this community. He has received positive feedback and would like to move forward with his vision in St. Regis. It has taken the PTA 3 years to raise funds for just 20 computers in a computer lab. The primary goal established for the next 2 years is to purchase new software. Mrs. Lynn, the library media specialist, and Mr. Sample have worked together to form a prioritized list. Mrs. Lynn ordered the software for the computer lab. There was no computer lab teacher. This duty falls directly to Mrs. Lynn. After a few months, teachers approached Mrs. Lynn about using the new software in classrooms. And consequently, Mrs. Lynn ordered some blank CDs and made copies for all of the teachers. One teacher who had taught in another district, Mrs. Brandon, had concerns, but Mrs. Lynn chastised her for not being frugal. Mrs. Brandon let her principal, Mr. Sample, know, and he addressed the concerns with Mrs. Lynn. Mrs. Lynn then proceeds to threaten him through making his objections known to the PTA. Her feelings are nobody will ever know, and why not? Who does it hurt? So, legal and ethical issues here. The question of harm. No physical harm has been done, but the authors of these software programs, their rights have definitely been violated. Does the action contravene any existing law? Actually, yes. Copyright law does extend to software. Districts should purchase site licenses or make copies only to replace lost or stolen items. The number of users should not exceed the number of purchased license. And there should be aggressive monitoring of the situation according to the text, A Teacher's Pocket Guide to School Law. No breach of contract, except maybe asking someone to do a job that they know very little about. Mrs. Lynn, although she is a library teacher and probably knows much about copyright law there, does not probably have a lot of experience with software copyright. And harassment. I don't know. I don't think so, but Mrs. Lynn is pretty aggressive in defending her actions. So, in one sentence, what has happened? Mrs. Lynn, the library media specialist, continues to copy software for teachers even after having been informed that it is wrong and against the law. When asked to cease and desist, she threatens those around her with telling community stakeholders. So, what is known about the people? Mr. Sample is a principal and he is new to the area, and in a rural community, we all know that can be difficult. Mrs. Lynn is the media specialist. She copies the software. She gets very defensive. She now knows it's against the law and doesn't care and doesn't seem to want to stop. And Mrs. Brandon is a teacher also new to the area, knew the copyright laws, and reported to Mr. Sample what was happening. It's taking place at St. Regis, a school in a small rural community with about 420 students. Kindergarten to 8th grade are housed in one building. There are 2 teachers per section, and it's a relatively poor district. The program in question, we talk about the PTA fundraisers for computers and software. They have worked 3 years and just bought 20 computers. What do we not know? Well, we don't know what Mrs. Sample, what Mr. Sample, holy smokes, Mr. Sample's knowledge is or his actions will be if he is fearful of Mrs. Lynn or the PTA. We don't know about Mrs. Lynn if she knows what the consequences are for violating these copyright laws. We don't know where St. Regis is located. And we don't know about the program if the PTA will support the copyright infringement or if they will be appalled at what's been happening with the programs. So could this be damaging to the stakeholders? Yes. It could be that law enforcement gets called in. It could cause friction between the school staff and the PTA. Which important stakeholders hold, stake in the outcome? Obviously, the student, staff, and the PTA. There could be a loss of funds. There could be fines up to $250,000. There could be jail time. So there's a lot at stake here. Have the relevant stakeholders been consulted? Not yet. Mr. Sample is in the process of just learning about what's happening. So could I learn more about this? I would like to know more about what the district policy is. Is there a central office, and do they know, and what steps would they take? Is there a school lawyer at hand that Mr. Sample could contact? And I would like to know what the PTA's response would be, or if they are strong or, would go up against the school. And do I know enough to make a decision? Yes, I do. So what could happen if I did nothing? So the no action would be let Mrs. Lynn continue. The likelihood is not high that anyone would find out, and the kids could use the program. The most comprehensive actions I could take is alert district office and the authorities. I could turn in Mrs. Lynn and the school. I could have every computer re-imaged and start from scratch. Other steps that I could take is I could discuss with central office and the school lawyer. Tell Mrs. Lynn to stop immediately and remove all copied programs from the computer and from her possession. Have all the computers in the classroom re-imaged and start over. I could provide training to stakeholders regarding law, policy, and consequences, and then meet with the PTA and give the same training. Or to just get a feeling for what their thoughts and ideas are regarding copying the software. So the pros and cons for each action. Pro on the no action step, obviously there's more access for students. Cons, it's against the law and there are stiff consequences and fines. The most comprehensive plan, the pro is it's the right thing to do. The con would be Mrs. Lynn could go to jail, or we could face, $250,000 in fines. The other steps, pros, it would show integrity, provides education and insight, enlightens the stakeholders. Cons, the students have less access and time with the software, and it could alienate Mrs. Lynn and Mr. Sample and Mrs. Brandon. So the best option, my final decision would be option 3, education and re-imaging. So here would be my path. I would contact first the lawyer in the central office. I would remove the programs from the computer and require Mrs. Lynn to stop and destroy the copies. I would work with the Board of Education and the Director of Operations to establish training and policies. I would train the staff and the stakeholders. The outcomes, all staff will know the laws and consequences and adhere to the policies. If this didn't work, the next step would be to address those who violate the policy, come up with an action plan. If they don't stop, ask the Director of Human Resources to step in and provide next steps for employment for these individuals. So the program standards that we addressed are operations and management, discussing, evaluate, communicate, and implementing laws, rights, and policies to promote student and adult success. I addressed this standard through my own understanding of the law and through the plan that I created to educate, inform, and work to create Board of Education policy. The references that I addressed are the Teacher's Pocket Guide to School Law and this external link.